The 2024 NHL playoffs are officially underway with every series getting into action, and man, it has been absolutely incredible, with almost every series having some incredible games up to this point. But what are my overreactions for the playoffs so far, and my biggest takeaways from the first few games? Well, make sure you watch till the end because we're going to be recapping all of it, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more playoff content just like this all throughout the season. And a bunch of content as well coming around the draft and free agency that you won't want to miss. Now let's start with one of the craziest series that we've seen so far, and that is the New York Islanders versus the Carolina Hurricanes, a series that has had some incredible moments only 2 games in. First, we had that 3-1 win by the Carolina Hurricanes in Game 1, a commanding, smothering win by them defensively, and then in Game 2, the Islanders would go up to a 3-0 lead and would choke it all away, losing 5-3. And boy, do I have some reactions to this one, folks. First off, one of my biggest takeaways so far in this series has just been how impressive the depth has been for the Carolina Hurricanes. Jordan Martinook continues to be one of the most underrated bottom sixers in the league, and come playoff time, always delivers. You can see what he did last year in 15 games, got 12 points, and this year has looked great for the first 2 games, getting a big goal as well. But he's just been a consistent performer in limited minutes for Carolina and continues to get the job done. Same thing goes for Stevan Nozen, Plano, Texas legend, and you could see also the consistency he's had, the playoff performances, 8 points in 15 games last year and a goal as well, just like Martinook this season. Both of these guys have been great physical players that play exactly the playoff style you want to see. I also wanted to highlight Jack Drury, who has really made some great progress over the past couple of years for Carolina. He's a guy that's gotten some bigger opportunity this year in ways and has performed pretty solidly. 27 points this year in 74 games and a point per game so far in the playoffs. He's deserved that though, and he's looked really consistent throughout the start of the series. There was a lot of talk, of course, of adding Gensel, and that was huge, but just like last year, the depth has been coming up in big ways for Carolina, and once those top guys get going, the Canes are going to be a lot scarier on offense. For my second takeaway, unfortunately, it's going to go against the New York Islanders here. Obviously, being down 2-0 in the series is not what you want to be at, but especially in the way that they've played, they've kind of been turtling at 5-on-5. You can see all the teams right now in the NHL in their expected goals for per 60 at 5-on-5. The Islanders rank last, and that's only behind the Golden Knights team that has played 1 game up to this point. The Islanders are dead last in that department, and at 5-on-5 have simply just not been good enough. They haven't been getting the scoring chances to win consistently. As John Shannon mentions, in Game 2, the shot attempts were 110 to 28 for the Carolina Hurricanes, and the Islanders only had 12 shots in the entire game. It's simply not good enough, and the Islanders are going to have to change big things if they want to win in Game 3, if they want to win this series in the end, even get any bit of momentum, because right now, Carolina is in a different league at 5-on-5, which is where most of the game in the playoffs is played. Now we're going to continue with the reactions and takeaways on to the next series with Toronto versus Boston, but first let's talk about today's sponsor in BetUS.
BetUS, America's favorite sportsbook and casino. Live betting and racebook. We're celebrating 30 years with a historic offer, a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits, plus 10% gambler's insurance. Get started today. BetUS, where the game begins.
Whether you want to bet on single NHL, NBA games, whether you want to go through different series as well, right now I'm going to put $10 down to win 15 on a plus 150 money line bet here for Boston and Toronto to go to 7 games. I had Toronto in 6 at my early predictions, but now I'm thinking this series is going to be even more close. BetUS also recently came out with draft lottery odds as well, and right now they got plus 550 for the Chicago Blackhawks to win. And we all know that Chicago is going to win another first overall pick. They did it last year with Connor Bedard. They're going to do it again. Plus 550 odds. I'm going to put $10 down to win 55. This is just easy at this point. Sign up to BetUS, and it helps the channel tremendously when you guys do, so every bit is appreciated. Now let's get into the Leafs and Bruins overreactions here, and this one might not be an overreaction after all, and it is a major concern for the Leafs, and that is the ghost play of Mitch Marner. It seems like we're getting another playoffs out of him where he has just had this disappearing act. He was a little bit better, I would say, in the 2023 playoffs, especially in that first series, had some big moments versus Tampa, but after that in Florida kind of floundered, and so far versus Boston has just been getting pummeled. He just looks irrelevant out there. 0 points in 2 games, has had some weird plays, some inconsistencies physically, and just doesn't seem all too engaged. If the Leafs are going to win this series in the end, Marner needs to be a factor and needs to play his best hockey in the playoffs, but consistently, we just really haven't seen that out of him, and it is quite a bit disappointing. On the flip side, you got 2 guys for the Leafs that they signed in this last offseason who have been playing that playoff game and have been succeeding because of it in Max Domi and Tyler Bertuzzi. Bertuzzi especially has had a great series so far versus Boston. Only has 1 point and assist in 2 games, but has really looked engaged, has had some great moments defensively, and has been one of the most active players on the ice, which is what you want to see in the playoffs. And with Bertuzzi, he's always kind of played that playoff game in the regular season, but having that show up in the playoffs has been beautiful. But to me, right now, the Leafs need to find a way to sign both of these guys, or at least one of them, because the way they play, the style of game they provide is so invaluable, especially to a Leafs team that has some star players not playing that game. And in the cases of William Nylander, not even playing in the game. Going on to the next reaction, we got Jake DeBrusk and how much this guy is going to get paid. I mean, as a UFA this upcoming year, DeBrusk is going to be a fascinating free agent and someone Boston might not be able to keep in the end. You can see 40 points in the regular season this year in 80 games, but consistently has been a great playoff performer for the Bruins, and this might be a big reason why he ends up getting a payday in the end. You can see so far versus Toronto where he is just their kryptonite. He has 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points in 2 games, has been a monster part of this series, and likely will be for the rest of it. Even though DeBrusk has always elevated his performance versus the Leafs, he's always still been a pretty good playoff performer. I mean, he has 24 goals in 75 playoff games so far, and especially at the age that he's at, that's pretty impressive to see. I could see him getting upwards of maybe 5-6 million if some team just gets absolutely crazy, because there are times where DeBrusk can be worth that, but the inconsistencies have kind of held back his production. Going on to the Stars and Vegas series, my big overreaction so far is that Jake Ottinger just might be the most overrated goalie in the NHL, and this is coming from a diehard Dallas Stars fan. I wish that Ottinger would be better, but in that game 1, it was just rough, man. There were a couple of goals that he should have had, or at least should have been closer to stopping, and it's so sad because he had been playing so good over the last month heading into the playoffs that I thought he was going to be a massive advantage. But if that continues, if his play in game 1 carries over the rest of the series, the Stars might get swept, honestly. Ottinger needs to be better, and really since that series versus Calgary, he hasn't been the playoff goaltender that I think a lot of people think he is. He had that great series versus the Flames, but since then has been pedestrian and at times really rough. He was awful in that series last year versus Vegas in the Western Conference Final, and he needs to be better. On the Vegas Golden Knights side of things, my main concern heading into the playoffs was the lack of chemistry with all these guys coming into the playoffs right at the same time. But of course, in game 1, it really didn't feel like that was an issue. Now, they came to a great lead and kind of just played a lot more defensive afterwards, which does make sense. And there were times where Dallas almost made that comeback. But with how the Vegas Golden Knights already were able to perform in game 1, the chemistry they have, it's not a hot take to say that they could already be the Stanley Cup favorite, especially when you compare the rosters from last year to this. They might have a better roster than last year, which is the scariest thing. Going on to the Oilers and Kings series, and I mean, there's not really much you can glean on this because it's a 1-game series, but I mean, with what we saw, it was pure domination by the Edmonton Oilers. I mean, at this point, it might not even be out of the realm of possibility to consider a sweep. I'm pretty sure I had the Oilers in 6, if I remember predictions correctly, but with how much they dominated versus the Kings, I mean, there's the Capitals and all the talk of them not being a playoff team or looking like it. Well, the Kings didn't even look like they were in the same stratosphere. They looked like a U12 team against the Oilers that last game, and we'll see if they're able to rebound. I also wanted to shout out Adam Henrique, who's looking like one of the better deadline additions this last year. Something that I was really hell-bent on was Henrique's value and what he could provide to a team like Edmonton, who was lacking depth in that middle 6, and so far, Henrique has been brilliant. I mean, I thought he was pretty solid for the Oilers in the regular season, but you could see so far in that first game, he was one of the best players, got a goal and an assist, 2 points, and it wasn't a fluke. He was playing that way leading up to the playoffs. He had a great last couple of weeks of the regular season, and to me, he could be exactly what that Oilers 4 group needed. Just some good depth, some good veteran presence, and that's what Henrique provides. Going on to the Canucks and Predators series, this is one that I'm really quite sad about. We got the news that Thatcher Demko would be out week to week, and that could really derail this series. I think it derailed that game too, where the Preds were able to really get off to a good lead and just keep it going. Even though they didn't get much shots, they were able to block a ton of shots, able to keep the Vancouver Canucks at bay and score when they needed to. But my big takeaway is that Elias Pettersson looks broken right now. In these first 2 games, he has been absolutely brutal for Vancouver. A -4, 0 points in 2 games. And really over the past few weeks, Pettersson had looked just awful. He finished the season at 89 points in 82 games, but I feel like heading into 2024, he was on pace for 110 points. He was brilliant in those first few months, but since the 2024 year calendar started, Pettersson just hasn't looked the same. Since he's gotten that huge contract, he hasn't looked the same. And so far is looking like a ghost of his former self. I mean, the guy has just not looked good. And for Vancouver, especially with Demko gone, they need their stars to come up. Quinn Hughes was trying everything last night, but Pettersson just could not finish a dang thing. Now going on to the Rangers and Cap series, there's been quite a bit to sink our teeth into. The Capitals have kept these games close and have kept it as close as they possibly could, but I've been pretty impressed by how the Rangers have played defensively. They're one of the better teams in terms of expected goals against per 60. They've had a lot of players coming up in a big way, and so far they're playing like a cohesive defensive unit, which versus Washington, I know isn't the greatest opposition in the world, but still, I've been very impressed with the form, the consistency that they've come out with. Big news as well for the Rangers is that it looks like Alexi Lafreniere is back to being a playoff beast, and it is humongous news for the Rangers. You saw what he was able to do in his first playoff run back in 2022. He got 9 points in 20 games and was looking pretty fantastic. Last year versus New Jersey, though, was pretty much completely neutralized. 0 points in 7 games, but so far versus the Caps in 2 games, he has 3 assists for 3 points, has looked incredible defensively, has been, in my opinion, one of the Rangers' best overall players. And if playoff Laf is back, that is great for the Rangers going forward. For my next takeaway, though, we go from Alexi to an Alexander, and this time with Ovechkin. In his series versus the Rangers, he's been pretty much invisible. I mean, this is a really interesting series so far on the Caps' perspective. The way they've kept it close with how really disengaged Ovechkin has looked. I mean, in 2 games, he has 0 points. He's a -1, has been just brutal on the power play, which is not something I would have expected, especially considering how good he was in the last couple of months. He was rifling pucks. He was getting everything on net, and it was all going through, and he was getting some fantastic luck to end the season, but he was really making his own luck. But in this series so far, he's been a net negative and just doesn't really seem to know what to do versus this Rangers squad, which kudos to them in the way they played around Ovechkin. They've done a great job just trapping him in every way. Going on to the Florida and Tampa series, we have to talk about Sergei Bobrovsky. Unless you were living under the biggest rock in the world, you did see that Sergei Bobrovsky behind the back, lunging save, absolute brilliance. But really, his series so far has just all been brilliance. He only has a 905 save percentage, but I think he deserves a much better rate up to this point. I think it will get better as the series goes on. But Bobrovsky, to me, has been one of the Conn Smythe favorites over these last few games. He has been absolutely brilliant for Florida, and has been a big reason why they're up 2-0 right now, making some key saves in some big moments. And like we saw last year with Sergei Bobrovsky having a brilliant playoff run there, Bob could be back in that playoff mode, and especially with how good Vasilevsky has been on the other side too. Bobrovsky will need to show up throughout the rest of this first round series, but versus Tampa, he has been brilliant, and I think will continue to be. Going on to the Tampa Bay Lightning side, though, my big takeaway is that their lack of depth is really starting to hurt this Tampa squad. You also just look at these scores that we've seen so far for the Tampa Bay Lightning, and it's pretty interesting to see. Only 7 different guys have actually scored a point through 2 games in this series, which isn't the craziest thing in the world. But you also consider the solid amount of goals that they've scored, and I think the spread has just been disappointing. I mean, you just got a lot of guys that I just don't think are up to the level that they probably should be, at least compared to the depth that Tampa has had before. And this is obviously going to be the casualties of the cap and being so good for so long. But I just feel like Tampa's depth is just kind of average. It's meh. I mean, Tanner should know. Got healthy scratched, he's been so bad and has been so banged up. That's, I think, a testament to just how weird and dysfunctional the depth has been for Tampa Bay, and especially versus a team like Florida that can roll out all 4 lines, all 3 pairs, and get something out of them. Tampa's depth has just kind of been killing them in the end and just hasn't been good enough. Going on to the Winnipeg and Colorado series, and maybe the big takeaway so far is the lack of goaltending from any side here. Even though Georgiev is still last in goals saved of expected, you could make the case that with that solid game 2, that he's actually been the better goaltender in this series. With Hellebuck, it was a little bit of a concern, just the lack of consistency in the playoffs. He's had some great years and some rough ones, but you can see last year in 5 games, he was pretty rough, an .886 save percentage, and this year through 2, he's allowed 6 goals per game, an .870 save percentage, and has been one of the worst goalies in goals saved of expected. He's had some decent moments here and there, but he has not been the Vezina winner that he has been for Winnipeg this year, and that to me is a huge factor. That could be the biggest factor heading back to Colorado. If Hellebuck is human, Winnipeg's losing this series. Especially when you consider how solid Colorado's been at 5-5 and how much better they're looking every single period of this series, and it could be over a lot sooner than we think if Hellebuck isn't what he needs to be. Speaking of players that haven't shown up for the Winnipeg Jets, a big one to me is Nikolai Ehlers, who has just had a horrid series up to this point. Some absolutely brutal defensive mistakes that have cost Winnipeg big time. But you can see just the consistency, the offense he's provided for Winnipeg when he's been healthy over the past few years. But also just look at the playoff stats. Always just kind of a non-factor. He's had some good moments here and there, but defensively isn't where he needs to be. Also hasn't been completely healthy during a lot of playoff runs, and it's hurt Winnipeg in some major ways. This year, though, he's just kind of been out there. He's had some okay moments, some okay chances, but it hasn't been the dynamic offensive threat that I think Winnipeg wants him and needs him to be on that top six. It really is unfortunate because I love Nikolai Ehlers, but with how he's playing in the playoffs over his entire career, he just might not be a playoff player. But those are some of my thoughts to the first few games of the NHL playoffs. I would love to know down below, what are your thoughts on the playoffs so far? What are your biggest takeaways? Do you agree? Do you disagree with any of my takes in today's video? I'd love to know your thoughts down below. Of course, make sure you share a video with all the hockey fans you guys know online. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you guys enjoyed. And of course, make sure you click on this card for all of my playoff talk right in one playlist. A lot of content coming up for the playoffs this year, so hopefully you guys end up enjoying. But we'll keep coming at you for daily hockey content, and we're gonna keep going with it. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and hope you have a brilliant, amazing hockey day, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.